Don't fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Just breathe. This marble floor is cold. It won't forgive you. Arthur Pendelton murmured the words like a lifeline. He stood beneath the gleaming brass awning of the Croft Grand Hotel, his weathered hand resting lightly on the door handle. A fine Chicago drizzle clung to the shoulders of his navy blue uniform. Though freshly pressed, the cuffs were frayed, the white threads showing like scars that couldn't be hidden. A sleek black Bentley glided into the drop-off lane. Its headlights swept across his face, catching tired eyes still trying to hold a polite smile. Arthur stepped forward, bowed slightly, and opened the door for a guest wrapped in a fur coat, a long silk scarf trailing in the wind. The faint scent of expensive perfume mingled with the damp chill of the street. Inside, the hotel was another world. Crystal chandeliers hung like suspended clouds, scattering warm light over polished wood panels. A piano in the corner scattered delicate notes into the air. Persian carpets cushioned every footstep. But at the threshold, Arthur was like an invisible hinge, not entirely belonging to the luxury inside, nor to the cold outside. A few meters away, Julian Croft, or Leo as everyone knew him, was polishing a window that stretched nearly to the ceiling. He looked like any other night shift cleaner, a faded gray polo shirt, worn khakis, rubber-soled shoes. But he wasn't here to clean glass. He was here for the numbers. VIP guest satisfaction down 12%, front desk turnover up 30% in just 6 months. Arthur's file stood out like an ink stain on a white page. 22 years of flawless service. Yet in the past 3 months, 3 violations: late opening a car door, mixing up a guest name, dropping luggage. Julian had planned to observe for a few more days, but the chance came sooner. Bryce, the young front desk manager in a silver-gray suit and red tie, emerged from the lobby. His smile was smug, his voice carrying the tone of someone used to giving orders. He didn't look at Arthur, but straight past him to address another staff member approaching. As he passed, he deliberately bumped Arthur's shoulder, making the older man sway slightly. "Watch it, Pops." His tone was curt, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Arthur didn't respond. He lowered his head, his hand clenched behind his back, knuckles whitening. Julian caught the moment. In his mind, the data faded, replaced by a conclusion. This wasn't just an individual lapse. This was contempt turned habit. The shift went on as if nothing had happened. Arthur opened a car door for an elderly couple who stooped to pick up a fallen handbag. When he stood, he leaned on the brass handle a beat too long, drawing a shallow breath before letting go. All those small signs of strain passed unnoticed by guests and staff alike. Midway through the shift, Julian was wiping the directory sign near the exit. He glanced at Arthur, then spoke as if to himself, but loud enough for the security camera to hear. "If you were me, what would you do when you saw a man breaking right before your eyes?" Chicago was colder at night when rain swept through the dark streets. Near 11 p.m., Arthur's shift ended. He walked quietly into the staff break room, a narrow space with yellowing white walls and a buzzing fluorescent light. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and floor cleaner. Arthur sat on an old wooden chair, slowly removed his gloves, and rubbed his lower back. His face tightened at the jolt of pain up his spine. No smile now, no straight shoulders, just an old, tired man alone. Julian stepped in, pretending to rummage in a locker. "Tough shift, huh?" Arthur startled. For less than a second, he straightened his back, the polite smile returning. "Every day is a privilege, son." His voice was warm, still professional, but his eyes betrayed an emptiness. Julian gave a small nod, asked nothing more, and left. Out on the street, he climbed into his old SUV and opened his tablet. KPI charts and service reports filled the screen, but his mind wasn't on the curves or numbers anymore. The image of Arthur alone in that cold room remained, as vivid as a photograph. Julian realized he had come here looking for a system flaw, but instead, he had found a man quietly falling apart, right at the threshold where the whole world entered with a smile and left without ever remembering his name. Morning in Chicago began with a thin veil of mist draping over the city. The Chicago River curled with white vapor like strips of gauze drifting between the glass towers. The Croft Grand Hotel glowed from within, golden light spilling through its tall, cathedral-like windows. From a distance, it looked like a fortress of prosperity and stability. But Julian knew better. The numbers on his dashboard told a different story. That morning, he decided to step deeper into the world guests never see. The basement, service corridors, and staff break rooms. There were no chandeliers or Persian carpets here, only the cold white light of fluorescent tubes, stained walls, and a lingering bite of cleaning chemicals. He met Maria in the laundry department, her hands red and cracked from daily exposure to chemicals, nails worn down to the quick. Marco, the Mexican line cook, was thin, his eyes bloodshot from heat and lack of sleep. Darnell, the elevator maintenance man, wore a grease-stained blue shirt, his hands thick with calluses. They called the front-of-house management the grinder, not because the work was physically heavy, but because of the way it ground people down piece by piece, cutting breaks, stretching shifts, ignoring harassment reports. Anyone who complained would have their schedule adjusted until they quit on their own. Julian listened more than he spoke, keeping up his cover as Leo, the approachable, non-threatening night cleaner. Maria's voice dropped to a whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear. One night, I worked 4 extra hours because we were short-staffed and Bryce was in the bar drinking with a VIP guest. We could only leave when the party ended, and by then, there were no buses left to get home. Marco gave a dry laugh as he recalled the time. He suggested hiring more kitchen staff. The office's answer was, cutting hours is the real saving. That evening, the rain returned. Passing the back exit, Julian spotted Arthur leaning against the cold brick wall, one hand pressed to his hip, head slightly bowed. The amber glow of a street lamp lit the silver strands of wet hair clinging to his forehead. His breathing was slow, measured, as if he had to count each breath to keep his balance. Julian approached. "You okay?" Arthur stayed silent for a long moment, then gave a faint nod, though his voice came out rough. "I'm not just tired, son. I don't have many options left." He spoke of his wife, who had died of cancer 3 years ago. All their savings and his pension had been drained by medical bills. His daughter in Portland still believed he was the front desk manager, a lie he preserved as the last shell of his dignity. She doesn't need to know her father stands all day at a door, bowing to strangers. She just needs to believe I'm all right. Julian didn't interrupt. He knew he was hearing a story that would never appear in any HR file. And in America, to lose everything to hospital bills and still have to keep working on your feet well past retirement age, that was a pain that needed no further explanation. The patter of rain on the tin roof mingled with the faint pop of champagne corks from a ballroom. Inside, a lavish wedding was underway, sequin gowns, echoing laughter. Out here, Arthur bent to push a heavily loaded luggage cart down the service corridor, the wheels squealing like they were complaining. 2 worlds separated by a single door, but in truth, the distance was an entire lifetime. That night, Julian decided to test the system. He entered the public computer room for staff, logged into Croft Holdings' employee voice portal, and typed, "An older colleague is exhausted and needs help." He sent it anonymously. 2 days later, an automated reply appeared in his inbox. "Thank you for your input. Croft Holdings is committed to employee wellness. Please direct your colleague to the resources listed in the employee handbook." No phone call. No one came to ask questions. Just a few cold lines that might as well have been written by a machine. One afternoon, as a VIP guest stepped out of car, Arthur approached to open the door. His hands trembled slightly, but he still bowed. When he straightened, he wavered, steadying himself on the luggage cart. The woman stepped out with a frown, clicking her tongue as if he had ruined her afternoon. Bryce stood nearby and saw everything. He didn't help, didn't ask. He just shook his head, pulled out his tablet, and typed something, likely another incident to add to Arthur's file. Julian watched from a hidden corner, his grip on a mop handle whitening his knuckles. He felt that a breaking point was coming. And if it did, it wouldn't just be another bad metric on a report. It would be a man collapsing right before his eyes. For the third day in a row, storms swept through Chicago. Wind screamed down the empty avenues, carrying with it wet scraps of newspaper and the last golden leaves of autumn. Rain no longer fell in drops, but in gray sheets, slanting hard against the glass of the Croft Grand Hotel, leaving streaks like claw marks. Inside, the main lobby was running at full capacity. Louis Vuitton suitcases glided across the marble floor, their wheels humming in smooth contrast to the squeal of car tires outside on wet pavement. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of freshly brewed espresso. Staff moved quickly, like the well-oiled cogs of a massive machine. But here, not every cog was turning smoothly. Arthur stood at the main entrance, his navy blue uniform plastered to his shoulders and back from the rain. Water dripped from the brim of his cap, tracing deep lines in his face before sliding down his neck. The cold had seeped through the fabric, straight into his bones. His sinewy hands gripped the handle of an umbrella, holding it over the head of a lady stepping out of a car. Bryce, stationed at the front desk, was simultaneously directing staff and flashing his practice smile at guests. When he noticed Arthur moving a fraction too slowly, his voice cracked across the lobby like a whip. "Hurry it up, Arthur. The Vanderbilts are waiting out there. You planning to leave them standing in the rain?" Arthur turned, nodded, and forced a smile. "Yes, sir." But the smile only emphasized the pale color of his lips. From the staircase railing, Julian wiped down the banister, his eyes fixed on Arthur's every move. He had seen the signs over the past few days, the drooped shoulders, shorter breaths, the tremor in Arthur's hands when holding an umbrella. He knew what was coming, but he didn't expect it so soon. Arthur stepped out onto the landing. Wind flipped the umbrella inside out, rain lashing across his face. He leaned forward, bowed to the guests, his voice hoarse from the cold. When they left, he lingered for a few seconds, as if trying to swallow back a ragged breath. Julian approached quietly. "Do you want to take a few minutes? I can cover the door for you." Arthur shook his head, a trace of pride in his eyes. "I'm fine, son. Just a long day, that's all. 5 o'clock. Rush hour." A bolt of lightning split the sky outside, its stark white flash slicing across the windows and momentarily freezing the lobby in a single frame. Arthur, with his head bowed, hand on the door handle, guests striding in, shaking rain from their coats, Bryce leaning in to whisper something to the receptionist. Then thunder rolled in deep and long. The lobby went still for 1 second. And then, clatter. Arthur's key ring slipped from his fingers and hit the marble with a sharp, ringing sound that carried through the space. He bent to pick it up, but as his knees bent, his body refused to obey. One foot slipped slightly, and he went down, not in a sudden fall, but in a slow collapse like an old building finally giving way after too many storms. 2 seconds. Only 2 seconds, but long enough to reveal the truth. No one moved. A couple of guests stopped, eyes wide but feet rooted to the spot. A receptionist glanced over, then back at the computer screen. Bryce, phone still in hand, turned his head with irritation at being interrupted. When he realized what was happening, his brows knit, not in worry, but in surprise. Julian dropped the mop, its clang echoing sharply across the lobby, shattering the silence. He sprinted forward, shoes sliding slightly on the wet floor. "Somebody call 911 now. Get a defibrillator." He's not breathing. His voice was steel, cutting through the air, making a few guests flinch. He knelt beside Arthur, pressed his fingers to the man's neck. No pulse. Julian began chest compressions, his hands locked, pressing hard and steady, his breath sinking with the rain hammering the glass roof above. Some guests backed away, expressions caught between fear and discomfort. A few pulled out their phones, unclear whether to call for help or record a video. No one stepped forward. Bryce stayed a few feet away before awkwardly signaling the receptionist to call an ambulance, his usual confidence gone from his voice. The wail of sirens pierced the sound of the rain. The revolving doors spun open, and 2 paramedics in rain slickers rushed in, pushing a stretcher and carrying their kit. They quickly took over, attaching electrodes and checking for response. Arthur was lifted onto the stretcher, wrapped in blankets to keep warm. As they prepared to leave, Bryce stepped toward Julian, bent down, and hissed, "Who the hell do you think you are? Barking orders here." Julian, still on his knees and breathing hard, lifted his head slowly. His eyes were cold, deep, and without a word, they made Bryce step back instinctively. When the ambulance doors closed and the siren faded, Julian looked down and spotted something small on the floor. It wasn't a thermometer or a broken umbrella. It was a brass name badge engraved with Arthur. He closed his fingers around it. The metal was ice cold. That sensation was a clear reminder. The shell of Leo had just shattered, and tomorrow morning, Julian Croft would return, not to polish glass, but to reclaim the dignity that had been abandoned in this place. The Chicago sky the next morning held no rain, but the clouds hung low and heavy, as if a thick curtain weighed down over the city. The stillness before a storm lingered in the air, and at the Croft Grand, that stillness came from more than just the weather. A jet-black Lincoln Navigator slid to a stop at the exact mark in front of the main entrance. The door opened, and Julian Croft stepped out. He was no longer Leo, in a faded polo shirt and worn khakis. Today he wore a charcoal suit tailored to his frame, a black dress shirt open at the collar, no tie, and leather shoes polished to a mirror finish. His face was composed, his eyes cold and sharp, carrying a power that needed no introduction. The senior managers, summoned for an emergency meeting, stood in a line in the lobby. Bryce was in the center, cream-colored suit, a smile fixed to his face like a mask, though the corners of his eyes trembled. Julian didn't look at anyone, didn't shake hands, and didn't greet. He walked straight past, the sound of his shoes striking the marble floor echoing with each step. Royal Ballroom. 5 minutes. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a military order. The ballroom that day was not dressed in its usual open silk curtains, but sealed tight. The overhead lights were cold white, spilling down onto the gleaming wooden floor. No tables, no chairs, no water service, only a single long table in the center bare. Julian stood at the head of the table, 3 massive screens already lit behind him. When the managers entered, the sound of their shoes rang loud in the empty space. He signaled, and the screens came alive. It wasn't a financial report or KPI chart, but security camera footage from the day before. No sound, only the image of Arthur staggering at the door. Bryce is shaking his head. Arthur bent to pick up his keys, then collapsed. 2 seconds of stillness. Guests staring. Staff frozen. Julian gave a nod. The technician switched on audio from a hidden microphone. Bryce's voice spitting out pops with contempt, the click of a guest's tongue, and finally Julian's own voice shouting, "Somebody call 911 now." The sound stopped. The screens went dark. No one spoke. It was as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Julian stepped forward and placed a small object on the wooden table, the brass name badge engraved with Arthur. He left it there for a moment, letting everyone see it clearly. This piece of brass, his voice low and steady, has more integrity and value than every person in this room combined. It represents a loyalty you took for granted and a dignity you allowed to be crushed. Each word landed like a nail driven deep into wood. He turned to Bryce. "You're done." Then his gaze swept over the group. The entire front-of-house management team suspended, effective immediately. A few opened their mouths, but one look from Julian shut them again. Bonuses for the executive team are frozen indefinitely. From now on, your job security will depend on one metric, the Employee Dignity Index. When it reaches 95%, you get your bonuses back. Not before. No one asked what the Employee Dignity Index was. They all understood. It was the new measure they would live by. Julian's voice dropped, but the weight remained. My father didn't start this company with money. He started it with a principle that you measure a society and a business by how it treats its most vulnerable members. Yesterday, we failed, which means I failed. It was no longer just a verdict on them. It was an admission of his own failure, and that made some lower their heads, not out of fear, but because they recognized the truth. That afternoon, Julian went to the hospital. The smell of antiseptic filled the air. The room was pure white, the overhead light making Arthur's skin look as thin as paper. He lay there, eyes open, breathing slowly. Beside the bed was a young woman with neatly tied brown hair. His daughter, her expression guarded. Julian paused at the doorway and knocked lightly. "May I have a few minutes alone?" he asked, meeting her eyes. She turned to Arthur, received a faint nod, then stepped out, closing the door softly behind her. Julian pulled a chair close and sat at the bedside. No rush, no words at first. He placed the Arthur badge on the small table beside the bed. "Arthur," he said, his voice low, meant for only the two of them, "I have a job for you. But before we discuss that, I need you to do me a favor. I need you to teach me. Tell me everything I was blind to." Arthur looked at him for a long time, as if making sure this wasn't another kind of test. Then his eyes glistened. A single tear slid slowly down his cheek. Julian didn't reach for his hand, but his gaze carried a promise. And in that moment, for the first time in many years, Arthur no longer felt like an invisible man. 2 weeks later, a crisp chill hung in the Chicago morning as the pale winter sunlight filtered through the tall glass facade of the Croft Grand. The sky was a clear, washed-out blue, reflecting off the river like a giant mirror. In front of the main entrance, a sedan came to a stop. The door opened, and Arthur Pendelton stepped out. The doorman's navy uniform was gone, replaced by a light gray suit tailored to fit, a crisp white shirt, and a wine-colored tie. His steps were slow but steady, each one grounded. The sunlight caught the gleam of a new nameplate on his chest. Arthur Pendelton, Chief Dignity Officer. The glass doors slid open automatically, and staff greeted him as they would a VIP guest. No more perfunctory nods. No more averted eyes. Arthur's new office sat on the ground floor, directly above the entrance where he had stood for 22 years, welcoming and farewelling thousands of people who never remembered his name. The space was simple: a walnut desk, a leather chair, a low bookshelf. On it, inside a small glass case, sat his old brass name badge, polished to a shine, but still bearing the small scratch in one corner. Beside it was a framed photo of his granddaughter laughing, hair tousled by the Oregon coast wind. On the desk lay the new action plan: mandatory dignity and respect training for all managers, policies to protect employee break times, and a direct hotline connecting staff straight to his office. Arthur reread each item, fingers brushing the edge of the badge, not out of nostalgia, but as a promise. No one would suffer in silence here the way he once did. That afternoon, the first test came sooner than expected. A young doorman, only a few weeks into the job, was opening the door for a difficult guest. The woman frowned at a raindrop that had splashed on her hem, snapping, "What do you think you're doing? This dress is brand new." The young man stammered out apologies, gripping the handle tightly. The newly appointed front-of-house managers were busy greeting a conference delegation and didn't notice. Arthur stepped out of his office. His shoes made little sound on the marble, but the young man heard him clearly. He stopped beside him and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son. Let me handle this. We're a team." Then Arthur turned to the guest, his voice calm and low, yet carrying a weight that commanded attention. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for the inconvenience. Let me take your coat, and we'll have your dress cleaned immediately, free of charge. Please, allow me to escort you to the lounge while we arrange it." The woman looked surprised, then nodded, letting Arthur lead her inside. The young man exhaled in relief, his eyes catching Arthur's nameplate, and for the first time he smiled. High above in the CEO's office, Julian stood before a screen, not showing profit reports, but the live camera feed from the main lobby. He had just witnessed Arthur handle the situation from start to finish. A slow smile spread across his face, a rare, unguarded one. He opened a drawer and took out a small object, a replica of Arthur's brass name badge he'd had made. He turned it in his fingers, the metal catching the afternoon light. By day's end, Julian left his office, bypassing the private executive elevator and heading straight to the staff break room. This room, once dim with peeling walls and broken plastic chairs, was now painted in warm tones, furnished with sturdy wooden tables and chairs, a new coffee machine, a bookshelf, and a small green corner for relaxing. Maria from the laundry was sitting with Marco near the window, cups of coffee steaming. They looked up, surprised for a moment, then smiled. Not the stiff kind, but genuine. Julian nodded in greeting, paused for a few seconds, and continued toward the lobby. There, Arthur was showing two younger staff members how to welcome a group of guests with professionalism and warmth. His voice wasn't loud, but anyone nearby could feel the confidence and respect in it. Julian stopped to watch. In that moment, the noise of the hotel faded, leaving only the sight of a man once treated as invisible, now standing as the foundation of a new culture. He stepped outside, merging into the flow of pedestrians. The setting sun cast golden light over the glass of the Croft Grand, turning the building into a solid block of gold. "We've spent a century building walls of marble and glass," Julian thought. "Now we'll learn to build bridges through conversation, starting with each quiet act of recognition." He closed his hand around the brass badge, the cool metal spreading through his palm. The next step wouldn't appear in any financial report, but he knew it was the number that truly mattered. Sometimes, change doesn't begin with a grand strategy or a massive investment, but with seeing a person, not a position in the company, not a performance metric, but a tired heart, a pair of eyes that need to be acknowledged. Julian Croft had come to the Croft Grand to find a system flaw, but instead, he had found a keystone. Arthur Pendelton, the man who had stood at the door for 22 years, almost forgotten, was proof that dignity can't be measured in profit, but profit will follow if you protect dignity. And then, a hotel doesn't just renovate its building, it renovates its heart. What would it mean if your workplace had a chief dignity officer like Arthur? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share to spread it, and subscribe to Toch Story so you won't miss more stories that reach the heart. Because who knows, the next story might be yours.